How good will Desmond Ridder be this season for the Falcons? And is that good enough to be their franchise quarterback?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and the very humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast show, a daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And we want to thank each and every one of you that makes this illustrious podcast your first listen each and every day. Shout out to the everydayers, especially this time of year. Where, you know, statistically, these are the least listened to episodes over the coming weeks of the podcast. But for me, and we'll talk about this a little later, but like these kind of are the episodes, particularly these camp previews, that can really kind of define what the next 6 months of this season, or at least our expectations for the next 6 months. And so for you everydayers that are, you know, in the summer doldrums, nothing's really going on, but you're still checking out each and every day. Of course, I try to do my best. So shout out to you guys. Make sure you follow in their footsteps by subscribing or following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So these episodes we'll start with the offensive training camp previews. We'll go position by position, starting today with the quarterback position. And as I just said, like these are kind of the defining episodes for the next several months, right? Upcoming season. You can really look back at these episodes in hindsight and really see like, oh, like this kind of set up everything. And again, you know, it's unfortunate that not everybody's listening to these episodes this time of year, but again, you everydayers out there are ahead of the curve. This will become even more abundantly clear at the end of the week when we get to the offensive line, where some of the things I said in last year's offensive line camp preview became very apparent and kind of change the trajectory of the Locked On Falcons as a whole, but we'll get to that later. But when we talk about these position previews, it's not just, hey, like here are the key camp battles. It's like, what are the big stories? What are the big narratives that we'll be following and real need to have answers to by the end of this upcoming season or by the end of the summer? And for the quarterback position, those, you know, that question is the same, right? How good a quarterback is Desmond Ridder? We need to find that out starting in training camp, and then, of course, have that carry over into the regular season. And what's funny about this is in May, I wrote an article for the Falcoholic called like What Everybody Gets Wrong About Desmond Ridder. And one incarnation of that article that I was going to write was talking about how Desmond Ridder in his first 4 starts showed all the components that you wanted to see from a young quarterback, but he just didn't necessarily put it all together. And I think this upcoming season is about putting it all together. And the angle I was going to take that article was Desmond Ridder needs to be like Voltron, right? Whether you're an 80s kid like myself, or more recently and checked out the show on Netflix. For those of you that don't know what Voltron is, maybe you're a little bit more familiar with a similar concept, which is, you know, the Zords and Power Rangers. But basically Voltron is a cartoon about, you know, these space pilots that fly these mech lions that when they come together, they form, you know, Voltron, the legendary defender, you know, can basically solve all the problems, right? And so like Desmond Ridder, that angle was like, and of course I wasn't able to write that because I'm a better podcaster than a writer, and I'm not that good of a podcaster. But you know, Desmond Ridder kind of showed all the little things that you wanted to see from a young quarterback that makes you feel better, but he just didn't necessarily put it all together in one game. Like you saw that progression over those first 4 starts last season. You saw, you know, it took him a couple of games before the offense really became a unit that you could feel like, you know, like the Arizona game was like the first time we saw a successful drive led by Desmond Ridder, where it wasn't just basically handing the ball off to Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson, as we saw for most of last season, whether it was Ridder, whether it was Mariota, that when the Falcons needed to move the ball, right, they relied on the running game. But we did see a quarterback-led drive against the Arizona Cardinals. We saw Desmond Ridder's off-structure ability. You saw him, you know, improve against the Ravens, you know, after a slow start that game, get better in the second half of that game, right? We saw the ability to handle pressure, right? I know a lot of people would be surprised to know that Desmond Ridder was PFF's highest graded quarterback last year under pressure, or at least highest graded passer, I should say. I think Lamar Jackson was the highest graded quarterback because the factors in run stuff. You saw the third down production. We've already talked about, what areas he needs to get better against man coverage, needs to be a little bit better in the red zone, those types of things. So we also need to see Desmond Ridder get off to faster starts than what we saw in each of the last games last year. So, this season is really about him putting it all together and forming Voltron. Like we got I'll form the head or whatever. It's a ridiculous analogy. This is why I didn't write about it. But, you just need to see all these components come together so that it will become a cohesive passer, right? And that's going to be the big question. And whether he does that is obviously, going to hang over the head of this football team each and every Sunday. And one of the things I think that are going to be challenging for myself, Jarvis, when we do the postcast, as well as you guys out there, is not trying to make every game be this referendum on Desmond Ridder. That the idea of Desmond Ridder, what he did in the most recent Sunday is what he's going to do forever. And this was something that I noticed among Falcon fans early in Matt Ryan's career, that they would tend to, particularly after Matt Ryan would play poorly, they would be like, well, he's not going to get any better than this moving forward. And it was like, that wasn't true. And again, this goes back to a conversation we had at the end of last year where we were comparing Desmond Ridder to Matt Ryan. And I know a lot of people, I got some pushback from people like, how dare you? And I'm like, I think some of that is owed to we mythologize Matt Ryan in his early career, because that first pass he threw was a touchdown against a bad team. Again, no one gives Matt Ryan a hard time beating the brakes off an 0-16 Lions team like they do Desmond Ridder, shining against, Tampa Bay or Arizona or whatever. But, it really wasn't Matt Ryan's team. Like the offense wasn't really driven by Matt Ryan until, like, to me, the first time that really happened was midway through his third season in that primetime game against the Ravens, the infamous Roddy push-off. Shout out to Roddy, doing your thing. Savvy veteran move, I say. Good no call on the ref's part. But, and then, it really wasn't until, the full transition to it being Matt Ryan's team wasn't until, year 4, year 5 for him. And yet there's going to be this expectation that, Desmond Ridder has to be a fully formed version of Matt Ryan or a fully formed version of any quality quarterback, in his 5th NFL start, which will be what will be the case when he starts the season. And I don't think that's fair. And again, it shouldn't be about this referendum of hey, this is what Desmond Ridder is going to be in perpetuity. We have to allow for us that, there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs with Desmond Ridder throughout the season, and not to basically, ride that emotional roller coaster and believe that, oh, just because we're in a dip doesn't mean it won't go back up, or just because we're in an up doesn't mean it's not going to dip back down. This is all part of the process of developing a young quarterback. And so that's going to be something that we're all going to have to work hard on being cognizant of. And I'm sure for many of you, you'll have to work so much harder than I will, because of course, I just know all of these things from Jump Street. But, that's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. And, the question is going to be, will it all come together for Desmond Ridder and this Falcon team this season and in the future? Because the real thing that's at stake, and that's what we're going to talk about next, is do the Falcons have their franchise quarterback, and is that Desmond Ridder? And we'll break down why I think the path for the Falcons, for Desmond Ridder to be the Falcons' franchise quarterback, is a similar path to what we've seen Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles carve out the last couple of years. And we'll get into that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But first, guys, I want to tell you that Major League Baseball is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And whether you want to bet on Major League Baseball, now that the NBA and NBA draft seasons are over, right, you can still bet your props on the upcoming NBA season. Of course, you can do the same for the NFL season. Bijan Robinson, Offensive Rookie of the Year, Falcons Super Bowl odds, division, win the NFC South odds, whatever you want. I love the Major League Baseball parlay builder. You can select which runner or pitcher you think is going to get the most runs and hits and homers in a single game. You can mix and match players to bet a little to win a lot in a parlay. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and you'll get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. So the question for us now is, what is at stake? This is why these episodes to me are important, because we need to understand what's at stake for the Falcons. And what's at stake for the Falcons, I think it's fairly obvious. Is Desmond Ridder the Falcons franchise quarterback? Meaning, and again, how you define franchise quarterback, the guy for the next 3 years and that guy for the next 10 years, whatever you define it as. The question is he the guy? Is he the guy that we're going to attach our hitch our wagon to for the foreseeable future? Again, whether you think the foreseeable future is 3 years or 10 years, we'll see. And that's an important question, right? Because it's the most important position in football. And I think Desmond Ridder can get there. I think the expectation when we talk about franchise quarterbacks, we think about like, Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and these other so-called elite quarterbacks. I look at the Eagles, and we talked about this in January after, the Eagles went to the Super Bowl, and we'll talk about it again. I think the Eagles provide a blueprint, because you look at a player like Jalen Hurts, obviously similar to Desmond Ridder, a day 2 selection, a player that a lot of people did not have high expectations. And after 2 seasons or a year and a half as a starter, still people were like, I don't know if Jalen Hurts is the guy. And then he kind of had this breakthrough season this year. And you're kind of hoping Desmond Ridder can follow a similar path. Now, Jalen Hurts got better year in, year out, 4 sort of middling starts his rookie season, then got better in the second season, but still left a lot to be desired, particularly in that Tampa Bay playoff game. And then it all came through to the point that he helped lead the Eagles to a Super Bowl, was a runner-up for MVP, and then landed this massive contract this offseason that at least I think currently is still makes him the highest paid quarterback in the league, which will probably be overshadowed by Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow at some point in the next 6 months, but we'll see about that. But I think what's interesting about the Eagles blueprint is that they were able to convince Jalen Hurts to take a team-friendly contract, right? Because when you look at, they're kind of committed to Jalen Hurts through like the 2025-2026 season. And if you look at Jalen Hurts' cap hits over the next 3 years, 23, 24, and 25, he's only going to count about $41.5 million against the Eagles' salary cap. That's less than an average of $14 million a year. And he's the highest paid quarterback in the league, and they're only technically over the next 3 years paying him like $14 million a year. So they got a bargain on that deal. And you compare that to a deal that Kyler Murray signed recently last year, where you look at his cap hits over the first 3 years of his contract extension, it's $80 million over those 3 years. So you're getting basically Jalen Hurts for half the price of Kyler Murray. You're saving roughly what $13 million a year, at least in salary cap between those two guys. And, you look at players that have like around a $13 million cap hit. Those are guys like Darius Slay. Those are guys like Jason Kelce. Those are guys like here in Atlanta, like Chris Lindstrom. And so essentially the idea is that Philadelphia was able to develop Jalen Hurts, get him to a point where he's arguably a top 10 quarterback, right? Pay him, but not pay him so much that it's going to prohibit their ability to continue to sustain their roster, because they're going to be able to keep guys like A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert, who they've already paid, keep that offensive line together, once Jason Kelce retires, still continue to invest in their defensive line, right? And even in a future where, Devontae Smith's probably going to come up for a contract not too in the distant future, they'll probably still be able to pay Devontae Smith premium dollars and build that supporting cast, so that Philadelphia's, is, while they didn't necessarily get over that hump this year, they should get, at least theoretically, several more bites of the apple over the next, 3 to 4 years, because they're getting a premium quarterback like Jalen Hurts on a relative bargain. And I think this is a blueprint that the Falcons can follow. Obviously, the first step in that process is Desmond Ridder proving that he's a good quarterback comparable to Jalen Hurts. But I think that is a more attainable path to success for this Falcons team moving forward than expecting Desmond Ridder to be, a top 5 quarterback, or to even think that the Falcons will be in a position at any point in the near future to land that type of quarterback, because those guys are obviously exceedingly rare. And it takes more luck than I think skill to land one of those guys. And I think that's an easier path and an easier blueprint for the Falcons to follow for sustainable success for the foreseeable future. Hope Desmond Ridder follows a path like Jalen Hurts, gets better year after year to a point that this Falcons team is playing meaningful games, in late January, possibly even February at some point down the road. Again, I don't think that's a 2023 goal, but like, again, 2023, your hope is kind of a first step to that. That can be kind of like the 2021 Eagles, you hope. But down the road. And then, if it comes time where we have to make a decision to pay Desmond Ridder or, move on to a different quarterback, you hope that Desmond Ridder has shown enough that he's worth a second contract and that maybe you can get him on a similar team-friendly deal that will allow you multiple bites at the apple rather than just one bite at the apple where it's like, oh, we have to win a Super Bowl in the next 3 years with Desmond Ridder because after his rookie contract expires, then we have to pay him and then it's all downhill from there. Hopefully we won't go down the Arizona Cardinals Kyler Murray path and we can follow the Eagles blueprint. But that is, to me, the hope, the goal. And this is to me, one of the reasons why I'm probably a little bit more optimistic about Desmond Ridder, because I'm not expecting him to need to be Patrick Mahomes or whatever in order for us to be successful moving forward. Like, I just like, hey, he could be Jalen Hurts. And like that is a path for success for this Falcon team. And I know some of you guys are like, well, he can't even be Jalen Hurts because you're not factoring that Jalen Hurts is, so gifted as a runner, and that brings a different element. And it's like, yeah, sure. But that's kind of why the Falcons have Bijan, right? Like to whatever, if Hurts is better than Ridder because of that running element, well, Bijan and Algier will make up that running element. So it's you're kind of still getting the same thing. You're just not getting it all in one player. You get what I'm saying? So like, this is kind of where I think the Falcons strategy moving forward. I think the Eagles are a good blueprint. And even if it doesn't work out for the Eagles, right, we don't know if this is, they're going to get those multiple bites at the apple that I just discussed in the next couple of years. But presumably sitting here today, they are the best team in the NFC, I think, by most accounts, and they should be able to keep their core of their roster together for at least another 3 or 4 years before they have to make, decisions about Hurts' future and other players and whatnot. And so they should be able to get more bites of the apple. But even if they aren't able to get back into Super Bowl contention over the next 3 or 4 years, I still think this is a worthwhile blueprint that other teams, maybe like the Falcons, can have greater success, following in the future. So we'll just sort of have to see if that is the case. But I think that's the path to Desmond Ridder being the franchise quarterback. It's not, hey, Desmond Ridder is going to, be that guy that you can expect to outduel, Patrick Mahomes. But more just like, hey, he can be the guy that can be that Jalen Hurts type of quarterback. I think that is a much more attainable goal for the Falcons and Desmond Ridder moving forward. And I think that's a worthwhile goal for the Falcons and Desmond Ridder moving forward. Because again, to me, just like Tom Brady was this sort of outlier for the last 20 years, I think Patrick Mahomes is going to be kind of this outlier for the next 15 or so years. And so teams that are like, oh, we got to be able to, like how many teams successfully were able to beat, Brady over the last 20 years? A few, but it wasn't simply because they had a better quarterback, right? Like that wasn't the path to that. And so I think that's the blueprint that the Falcons are hopefully going to follow. So we'll see if they can do that moving forward. I think so much of the conversation about the quarterback, it revolves around how teams approach it, right? And like especially when we watch meaningful football in January and February, right? So often these games kind of boil down to a pitcher's duel. And you see in the last couple of Super Bowls, Joe Burrow versus Matt Stafford, Hurts versus Mahomes late in games, they basically become pitcher's duel where the quarterback kind of has to put the team on his back and, will them down the field to score points when they need it in crunch time. And I think people tend to focus on, do you have a quarterback that can win that pitcher's duel? And understandably so, because that matters, particularly in January and February. But I think the Falcons, for the better part of recent history, because of with the Matt Ryan era and Julio and all that stuff, they were so focused on winning the pitcher's duel and building a team that could win the pitcher's duel that they've kind of forgot that the first 3 quarters of most football games, particularly during the regular season and also in January, are not pitcher's duel, but they're more rugby matches, so to speak, where the physicality of football kind of show themselves. And the Falcons were built to win a pitcher's duel, but they were not built well to win the rugby match. And now I think the Falcons are gearing up to win the rugby matches. And the question is, will they be able to win pitcher's duels? And time will tell on that with Desmond Ridder and his development. But for me, it's not something I'm going to lose too much sleep over, because I'm just like, hey, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. When we get to the fourth quarters and we need a guy that can win the pitcher's duel, right? Come January, we'll see if Desmond Ridder is capable of that. But first of all, we need to get to January. And I think, we need to focus on winning the rugby match to maximize our chances of playing those games, to getting to a point where now we can start to assess whether or not he's capable of winning the pitcher's duel. Like, to me, it's like putting the cart before the horse. Like, I think people are so focused on we got to win the pitcher's duel, and it's like you wind up being the Chargers, where you got a quarterback that can win the pitcher's duel, but you never get to the pitcher's duel because you always lose a rugby match, right? And that's kind of how the Falcons were for most of the last 15 ish years. And I think it's understandable why this regime is going down a different path. And, I applaud them for going down that different path and say, let's try something different. Let's try something new. And that's why I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about whether Desmond Ridder is the guy that can win the pitcher's duel, because we haven't got to that bridge yet. We'll cross it when we get there. But that is where I'll leave the thoughts on Desmond Ridder. We'll wrap up today's episode talking a little bit more about the other quarterbacks on the roster, including, one that we haven't spent that much time talking about with Taylor Heinicke. We'll talk about what Logan Woodside is bringing to the table as a scout team quarterback, that and more to wrap up today's episode. But of course, guys, for the everydayers out there that will also be tuning in tomorrow, of course, we'll be breaking down the running back group and talking about why it is the foundation of the offense and how exactly the Falcons are going to divvy up the carry. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. So wrapping up today's episode, let's talk about Taylor Heinicke. And he's a quarterback that, similar to, not for the same exact reasons, but similar to what it was with Marcus Mariota. I kind of told you guys when we first signed Marcus Mariota, I was like, yeah, he's going to be the starting quarterback, but we're probably not going to spend that much time talking about Marcus Mariota because he's not that interesting, because he's just kind of a bridge quarterback. And it's funny because we signed Taylor Heinicke to a similar deal, but the expectation is not that Taylor Heinicke is going to be a bridge quarterback. He's going to be a backup quarterback. And I think Heinicke is a good backup in the sense that he is going to be that capable backup that can provide some of that mentor, that leadership ability in, be that extra set of eyes in the QB room for Desmond Ridder. There may have been better options out there for that type of, hybrid QB coach, player coach type of player. I know that's a big reason why a small subset of Falcon fans were hoping the Falcons would bring back Matt Ryan to basically be that type of entity for Desmond Ridder. Although that, I think Matt Ryan's presence would complicate things a little bit beyond that. If only life could be so simple. But I think Taylor Heinicke brings some of that to the table. And by all accounts, we talked with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders earlier this offseason. He's a great teammate. He's going to be the embodiment of what you're looking for in that type of role. But also, I think Taylor Heinicke has shown over the last couple of years, when he's gotten opportunities to play, that he can be a competent starting quarterback in the league. Now, the issue with Taylor Heinicke has been that the longer you kind of play Taylor Heinicke, like if you need Taylor Heinicke to come in and start like 4 games for you, Taylor Heinicke's one of the top backups in the league. But what was happened in Washington in the last couple of years is they've needed him for more than 4 games. They needed him for 8 games or 10 games or 12 games. And the longer that kind of goes, the more flaws and the more limitations in Taylor Heinicke's game kind of get exposed over the long term. And so he's a high-level backup, a low-level type of starter. But I think that's perfectly fine for what the Falcons are looking for. Again, they're looking for more of that mentor type. But in the event where Taylor Heinicke is forced to play, whether that's due to Desmond Ridder struggling, whether Desmond Ridder getting injured, whatever the case may be, Taylor Heinicke is the type of guy that can come in and allow this team to tread water, right? That when we're talking about, if this team is capable of winning the rugby match, then Taylor Heinicke is more than capable. Again, I don't know rugby analogies, but the captain of that team, right? Like, he's not going to go out there and win the pitcher's duels, but he can be the guy that can steward those rugby matches and keep this team that in the event, the goal of this team is to play games in January, right? What a crazy idea that a football team, people that are paid to win football games are trying to win games. And I only say that for the handful of you guys that are tankers that believe that, this team's success hinges on them sucking rather than succeeding. But like, again, I always say, like, again, you're more entitled to your opinion, but that's counterintuitive to the business of football. And so it's just weird to me that people still don't get that. But like, Heinicke is the type of guy that in the event that the Falcons, things go awry and the Falcons need to plug and play with a competent starter that can, give you league average production at the quarterback position, as well as, give you good enough quarterback play, league average, to keep this team in 500, as a 500 team or better, assuming that the other components of the team, Heinicke can give you that. So, I don't know if we're going to spend too much time. Hopefully we don't spend any time talking about Taylor Heinicke, if I'm being honest, because usually that probably means something has horribly gone wrong, right? But like I think, Taylor Heinicke is a good backup for this football team, and someone that a lot of folks, myself included, sort of identified as an ideal get for the Falcons to be that QB2 ahead of this offseason. And the Falcons were successful in doing so. Now, let's talk about the last quarterback on the roster, Logan Woodside. Don't have too many takes. Most of the takes I hear about Logan Woodside is how dare he wear number 11? How dare you stand where he stood? But, Logan Woodside, the expectation as a third quarterback, he's going to be probably on the practice squad. He'll probably be the guy that runs the scout team, for the Falcons. That was Desmond Ridder for a large chunk of last year. And then it was Logan Woodside once Mariota went on IR at the end of the season. And I think Logan Woodside has shown, whether it was in Tennessee or now in Atlanta, that he's capable of being that sort of scout team, third quarterback, emergency guy, if need be. And when he's gotten opportunities in the preseason, has done enough good work to feel like, okay, he could be turned into a Taylor Heinicke type of player with further development. Whether he gets that opportunity here in Atlanta moving forward remains to be seen. But, I think when it comes to the scout team stuff with Logan Woodside, he'll be able to be functionally a capable scout team guy for most of the Falcons opponents. I think what's going to be interesting later this season, when we get to the end of the season, where we face certain more mobile quarterbacks like Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson, I don't know if Logan Woodside's bringing enough there to effectively mimic, what the team needs to prep for those games. And for those of you that aren't familiar, I realize now maybe I should explain a little bit what scout team is. But the scout team is the practice guys that help the rest of the team, prepare for the upcoming opponent. And so they often try to mimic what the opposing team is going to try to do so that the team during the week can practice against it, right? And so, I don't know if Logan Woodside is going to be quite Justin Fields or Anthony Richardson's scout scheme. And again, this is where, Felipe Franks, time to shine. And so we'll talk about Felipe Franks when we get to the tight end position later this week. But, I still think there's a role for Felipe Franks, if only to help the team simulate Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson when we get to those games in December. But I think overall this quarterback room is solid. We'll see what Desmond Ridder can bring. I think Taylor Heinicke is a known commodity. You like having that stability. We had that with Matt Schaub for years. Again, that's not necessarily a sexy player to a lot of folks' eyes, but that is one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league, top 5, top 10 type of backup. And then Logan Woodside can be a functional scout team player that can be serviceable in the event that, multiple injuries happen and he's forced to play. I think Logan Woodside has done just enough that you feel like, okay, we can function with Logan Woodside as a starting quarterback. Obviously, that's going to be a week if we get to that point, and God forbid we do, but if we get to that point, that's going to be a heavy Bijan and Tyler Algier day. But Bijan and Algier will be the crux of the conversation on tomorrow's episode when we break down that position group, guys. That's all we have for the quarterback position. If you have any feedback that you want to provide on this conversation about the quarterbacks or any of the other positions, of course, you can hit me up on a variety of platforms, including Facebook or Twitter at Locked On Falcons. Hit me up via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. And of course, you can hit me up in the Locked On Falcons Discord. So guys, that will do it for us here. Appreciate everybody that continues this time of year to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Hawks. Get the lowdown on the latest on what the Hawks got in the draft, as well as what they're gearing up for in free agency as well, because this is going to be a pivotal offseason for the Atlanta Hawks. So check out Brad Rowland, host of Locked On Hawks, on the same podcast platforms that you're checking out Locked On Falcons. And of course, Locked On NFL is a great second listen as well, to get the lowdown on what the other 31 teams in the NFL are dealing with during this time of year as well. So guys, really appreciate you tuning in. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope you have a great week. Till then.